Nintendo Switch 2 has been officially revealed, which means it's finally that time for me to sit down and share my predictions for what I think its launch lineup is going to look like. I'm going to be talking potential prices, I'm going to be talking potential release dates, potential launch games, third-party support, accessories, the whole shebang. So sit back, relax, and get hyped because today we're going over all of it. Now, as of the time of recording this, it's been a week, right? We were able to sit down and stew over all the news that poured out about Nintendo Switch 2's reveal, and I really did want to sort of take that week to think up what exactly I think the launch for this thing is going to look like, because I saw a lot of people rush out prediction videos, which I completely understand. You want to jump on the hype, but I feel like a lot of people missed very crucial things that I almost think are locks for the launch lineup. I haven't seen some of the stuff that I'm going to bring up here anywhere. Now, of course, that's not to say that some of my predictions aren't going to line up with pretty much everybody else. There are some very, very obvious ones, both in terms of first-party releases, third-party releases, and then also what I think we're going to see in terms of pricing. But I think we should start with the games. That's obviously the most important thing when it comes to a new Nintendo system. What is the launch lineup of games going to look like? Now, obviously, I'm expecting a lot of stuff in the launch window in like the first 6 months of this system's release. That is not what I'm here to discuss today. I am here to discuss what games I think are going to be there on day one. And I bring that up because I've seen so many people saying they think we're going to get a big new 3D Mario at launch. And I am here to say I do not think that is going to happen at all. Would I love that to happen? Of course. You guys know me if you follow my YouTube channel. I love the 3D Mario games, Mario 64, Mario Sunshine, Mario Galaxy. I would love to see a new 3D Mario at launch. However, I really do think that is going to be the Switch 2's big holiday game. What was that, by the way? I just saw a feather fall down. Maybe that's a sign for something I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But before we move away from the 3D Mario talk, the one thing I will say is I am absolutely predicting that we are going to see that game in the Nintendo Switch 2 presentation that happens in April. Again, I don't think it is a launch game. I think it's probably going to be launch holiday, but I do think we are going to see it during that giant April presentation. Now, the thing we are obviously going to see at launch, the thing we are obviously going to find out more information about during that Switch presentation, and the thing that involves Mario at launch is, of course, the new Mario Kart. Now, look, I could do a whole prediction video about what I think we're going to see in the new Mario Kart, but I'm going to save that for a later day because I honestly think there's a lot of stuff to go over just from that little trailer that we saw already. What I will say is this. I'm going to make a hard prediction. This game is not called Mario Kart 9. I've seen so many people referring to it as such, and I obviously think that makes a lot of sense. For people who aren't following a lot of stuff and don't know Nintendo's history, I do think Mario Kart 9 makes the most sense for a title, considering the last mainline game was Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. But there's two things against that. One, Nintendo absolutely treats Mario Kart Tour like a mainline Mario Kart game, because if you played any of the DLC for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, you know that so many of the tour courses, in fact, I think all of the tour courses, were actually remastered for that title, and that game is considered internally Mario Kart 9. Now, with that being said, could it be called Mario Kart 9? Absolutely, but I don't think that's the route they're going to go with. I do think it's going to have some type of subtitle related to whatever the gimmick of this game is going to be. On one hand, it could just be Mario Kart 10, right? They could end up calling it Mario Kart 10, assuming that Tour was 9. You know, they could Romanize the 10 as an X, make it a crossover game, and we know that this is going to have a huge roster of characters because we now know that one of the big gimmicks of this game is actually that you can have 24 racers in a single race. That's obviously going to be very exciting. I can't wait to do online matches with all of you on launch day when that game comes out, but I do think, again, the gimmick for the game is going to be present in the title in some capacity, and I don't think it's going to be as simple as Mario Kart 9. I will say, 100% lock, though, this is the big first-party launch game from Nintendo that is exclusive to Nintendo Switch 2. All right, so we got Mario Kart locked in for launch. I'm saying that the 3D Mario game is not going to be there at launch, and that's going to be a holiday game. What does that leave for Nintendo to have at launch? Well, traditionally, we've seen two trends from Nintendo at launches for systems. One, in recent years for their mainline home consoles, we've seen some type of cross-gen release. We saw this with GameCube going into the Wii with Twilight Princess. We saw this with the Wii U going into the Switch for Breath of the Wild, and I do genuinely believe that with the Switch going into the Switch 2 era, we are going to see at launch for Switch 2, Metroid Prime 4. And really, Metroid just checks a lot of boxes. One, it acts as that great cross-gen game that could showcase the power difference between the original Switch and the Switch 2. Two, it also acts as a great game for the hardcore there at launch. Obviously, everybody's going to be playing Mario Kart, but I do think they want to have a more narrative-focused single-player experience for the hardcore gamer at the launch for Switch 2, and Metroid obviously fills that niche. And three, a big thing with these cross-gen releases is they always like to showcase what makes the game different on the new system. Obviously, with Twilight Princess, it was motion control. With Breath of the Wild, it was that you could take a console Zelda on the go. With Prime 4 Beyond, we've kind of already seen what I believe to be the gimmick of the Switch 2 version of the game in the first look trailer for Nintendo Switch 2, and that is Joy-Con mouse controls. Now, people can speculate what the mouse controls are going to be like. I've seen people rolling Joy-Cons on their legs to try to simulate it. Look, we're not going to find that out officially until we get that big Switch presentation in April, but I do think that Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, being a shooter, is the perfect game to showcase those mouse controls. I am someone who normally plays my shooter games with a controller because I'm a filthy casual, but I always hear from my hardcore gamer friends that I should really be playing these games with a mouse and keyboard. Well, I might not play with a mouse and keyboard, but the idea of having a control stick to use my movement and the mouse to actually aim actually does seem like something that I would utilize, and again would be a really great way to showcase that feature of the new Joy-Cons during that Switch 2 presentation. And one other quick note I want to make regarding Metroid is that obviously that rumor is floating around right now about some type of February direct for Nintendo that sort of wraps up Nintendo Switch's library before moving into Switch 2. I do think that during that presentation we are going to see more gameplay for Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. However, I don't think we're going to see an exact release date. I think we're going to get a trailer and we're going to see it looks really amazing, but I think the release date is going to be held for the Switch 2 presentation because I think the release date for Metroid Prime 4 Beyond on both the original Switch and on Switch 2 is actually one and the same with Switch 2's release date. And obviously they're not going to release Switch 2's release date during a Nintendo Direct unrelated to Switch 2. So we're locking in Mario Kart and we're locking in Metroid Prime 4 as launch day games. What else do I think we're going to see from Nintendo? Well, one, I think we're going to see something akin to 1-2 Switch, not necessarily something that's branded with an IP. I think maybe WarioWare could work for the game I'm about to describe, but I do think it's going to be some type of smaller kind of party multiplayer family game that focuses on those mouse controls and just how fun it is to utilize them. Again, look at the launch of Switch, right? There was a huge focus on HD Rumble during that presentation, but realistically, a lot of games as the Switch life cycle went on really didn't utilize HD Rumble all that much. I think we're going to see something very similar at the early days of Switch 2, where you're going to see a lot of games showcase these mouse controls, but then as we move further and further into the system, they'll still be there, but I don't think they're going to be like one of the big primary focuses of what makes the system so different. So I do think it's going to be, like I said, a 1-2 Switch type experience that utilizes the mouse controls in a family setting. But again, if this game is branded with an IP, WarioWare makes a lot of sense. WarioWare Smooth Moves came out like a month or two after the original Wii's launch. Game & Wario had a very similar situation with the Wii U's launch. It would make a lot of sense for that type of game to be there around the launch of Switch 2. Now, that's the only problem with this prediction though, right? Is if it is a WarioWare game, traditionally they are not there launch day, they're right after. And today's predictions are all about launch day games. So my prediction is that if it is a WarioWare title that falls in this category, I think it's going to be a couple months after launch. But if it's not branded with WarioWare and is either a new IP or something that's a little more generic like 1-2 Switch, that will be there on launch day. And I know this might not necessarily be what everybody wants to hear, but I do think that party game I just mentioned, Metroid Prime and Mario Kart, are going to be the only three first-party titles from Nintendo at Switch 2 launch. Again, that is not to say that they won't show off a bunch of future games during that Switch 2 presentation, like the 3D Mario that's for sure going to be coming out this upcoming holiday, like the new Splatoon game, which of course they're going to want to push, because again, it's a shooter, it's got motion controls, it's a major franchise for them, it's massive in Japan. Splatoon 3's been done for a while. Of course, we're going to see Splatoon 4. And the other big thing I think we will see during that presentation is a new game from Monolith Soft, whatever that new RPG is that they've been working on. But again, that's not going to be a launch day game, and this video is about launch day games. So what other games do I think people are going to be playing on launch day? I think that's up to the third parties. I think a big reason why Nintendo isn't probably going to have a lot of stuff out on launch day for Switch 2 is because they don't need to. Every third party under the sun has already come out and said that they're making games for Nintendo Switch 2, and of course they are, because why wouldn't they? So many of them probably wanted to put their games on the original Switch 1, but fact of the matter is, Switch 1 was underpowered, so a lot of those games just simply could not run there, and so I think a lot of these titles that they've just been waiting to release on a Nintendo console are going to be there day one for Switch 2. So let me go over a brief list of what I think those games are. First and foremost, I have been screaming this from the rooftops for years at this point. Elden Ring is going to be one of those games. I always hear people going, no, there's no way, Roger, there's no way the Switch 2 can run Elden Ring. Of course it can run Elden Ring. If the Switch 2 can't run Elden Ring, there's a much bigger problem at hand, because Elden Ring can run on a base PS4, and the DLC can also run on a base PS4. So obviously, I think we're going to get Elden Ring Complete Edition with the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC for Switch 2's launch. Also, that would just look so good in the launch trailer for Switch 2, showcasing third-party support, to have Game of the Year Elden Ring and nominated for Game of the Year Shadow of the Erdtree DLC available on the system. Another game that's an absolute no-brainer lock for the launch of Switch 2 is an Assassin's Creed game from Ubisoft. Ubisoft is always there, a ride or die for Nintendo at launch, and while I don't play a lot of their games, I do know that people love the Assassin's Creed franchise, and whether or not this is a Switch 2 version of Assassin's Creed Shadows, which I know just recently got delayed, or this is maybe an older Assassin's Creed game like Assassin's Creed Mirage, I'm not really too sure, but I do know no matter what, Assassin's Creed in some capacity will be there at launch for Switch 2. I also think Ubisoft could release that Mario Rabbids collection that's been rumored, but I really don't think they're going to want to have that at launch to compete with Mario Kart. I think they might just wait a couple months to release that. And while we're on the topic of rumors, I heavily believe that rumor that there's going to be major Microsoft support in that first year for Nintendo Switch 2 launch. Lots of Xbox games are going to get ported over. Lots of those titles are going to have new life breathed into them on the Switch. But there's 3 games in particular from Microsoft that I actually think are going to be there on launch day. One of them is Microsoft Flight Simulator. I know this seems like an odd choice, but again, think of those mouse controls. Think about showcasing that in a presentation and what that might look like to really clarify how different these Joy-Cons are. Flight Simulator seems like a really good pick for that. Another one is Halo Master Chief Collection. This is something people were clamoring for back on the Switch, and I think having some type of hardcore shooter game that's available, that's multiplayer at the launch of Switch 2 is going to be lucrative for whatever company is going to be the one to release it, and I think Microsoft probably wants to be that company, and I think the game is going to be Halo. And the other game I think we're going to see from Microsoft on launch day for Switch 2 is Sea of Thieves. This was rumored a while back to be coming to Switch, but honestly I don't think the Switch can necessarily handle it, and obviously Nintendo has a relationship with Rare dating back to Banjo-Kazooie and the Super Nintendo days even before that, and actually even the NES days before that. So obviously it'd be cool to see a Rare game on a Nintendo platform again. I don't think we're getting a new Banjo or anything like that, but I do totally believe that Sea of Thieves will finally make its way to a Nintendo platform. However, there is one other Microsoft game that I think is absolutely going to be their launch day for Switch 2, and that is Minecraft. Not only is there a Minecraft movie coming out this year, not only would Minecraft make a lot of sense with those mouse controls, but also they are never going to pass up an opportunity to port Minecraft over to another system. There's a PS5 version of Minecraft, even though you could play the perfectly fine PS4 version. I feel like there absolutely will be a Switch 2 version of Minecraft, even though there's already a Switch version, simply due to the fact that think about little Timmy's parents when they're going to the store to go buy the new Switch. They're going to see Mario Kart, and what else are they going to see to go snatch up for little Timmy? Minecraft. Naturally, Minecraft will be there, mark my words. But moving away from Microsoft, let's go to another major third party, and that is Capcom. Now, I actually think there's a lot of cool opportunities for Capcom to put a game on Switch 2 at launch, but honestly, I think the pool is kind of small considering what a stacked year Capcom has lined up, especially because Monster Hunter Wilds is coming out in February, and I don't necessarily think that game is going to be coming to Switch 2 anytime soon. So, with that being said, what do I think the Capcom game is going to be at launch? I think it's kind of down to 2 titles. One, I actually think we might see the Resident Evil 4 remake on Switch 2. Obviously, Resident Evil 4 started its life as a GameCube exclusive. There's a lot of history there with Capcom, and I think it would be kind of poetic to have the RE4 remake running on the Nintendo Switch 2 at launch. The other game that would make a lot of sense, and is a franchise that we've seen regularly at the launch for Nintendo consoles, is Street Fighter. We had that new version of Street Fighter 2 that was on Switch. We also had Street Fighter 4, remember this, for the 3DS? I think the time is right for Street Fighter 6 to finally make its way to another console, and I think that console is going to be Switch 2, especially considering they just did a whole DLC thing. They could maybe do a complete edition for Switch 2, or they might just bring over the regular version and have people buy the DLC separately. Either way, Street Fighter 6 makes the most sense for some type of major fighting game to be there at launch for Switch 2. Now, if Street Fighter 6 doesn't end up filling that fighting game slot for the launch of Nintendo Switch 2, I actually think I figured out another game that could. No, I don't think it's Tekken 8. I think it's a little too early for Tekken 8 to come to Switch 2. I also don't think that with the way Tekken 8 is right now, it can necessarily come to Switch 2. I'd love to see Bandai Namco work their magic, but I just think it's a little too powerful for the system. One game that's not, that can run on a PS4, is Grand Blue Fantasy vs. Rising. Not only is it a fantastic fighting game, but Nintendo already has a history not just with Arc System Works, but with Cygames. Nintendo and Cygames co-developed Dragalia Lost for mobile. We already know that guest characters are being added to Grand Blue. We just saw 2B during the last season. I think it would be awesome to not only see a Nintendo Switch 2 port of Grand Blue Fantasy vs. Rising, but also in the Nintendo version to have a DLC character that's from Dragalia Lost. And that will bring me to what I am dubbing the Big Three, which is not to say that any of the games that I mentioned earlier aren't a huge deal. Of course they are. All those games are fantastic. However, these next three games I think would send shockwaves through the video game community to see on a Nintendo console. The first one is Baldur's Gate 3. I feel very strongly Game of the Year 2023, Baldur's Gate 3 is going to be a launch game for Nintendo Switch 2. People absolutely adore that title. Obviously, it has not been on a Nintendo system yet, and I do feel like having the mouse controls in the Joy-Con is going to be a massive deal to people who maybe wanted to play on a console, but previously only played on PC because they wanted to play with a mouse. Again, you can play with a controller just fine on the PlayStation or the Xbox version of that game, but having that game not only being handheld where you could take it on the go, you could take your Stereons wherever you want, but also having mouse controls I think would be a game changer and be a really cool thing to showcase in the Switch 2 presentation. The second game is Red Dead Redemption 2. This has been heavily rumored for Nintendo Switch 2 at this point, and considering the fact Red Dead Redemption got a release on the Switch and apparently it sold quite well, it would make a lot of sense for Red Dead Redemption 2 to be there for Switch 2 and most likely be there at launch. That's a massive title that again would get a lot of people talking. But of course, I saved the best for last, at least in terms of my taste, and that is the big one, drum roll, Final Fantasy VII Remake. I believe, folks, I really think when April rolls around and we see that Nintendo Switch 2 presentation, we are going to see Cloud looking up at the Shinra building in Final Fantasy VII Remake on a Nintendo console. This would be a momentous occasion, especially considering the history of Final Fantasy VII, Sony, Square, and Nintendo. It would be a massive deal to have Remake on Switch 2, and again, Remake is a PS4 game. I could see a debate whether or not Rebirth could come to Switch 2, but that's a whole different topic of conversation. But Remake, the original Remake that's on PS4, no doubt about it, Square Enix now has a great relationship with Nintendo, and I think it would be so cool and would make a lot of sense to have that game not only on Switch 2, but to have it as a launch title. If there's not going to be a Zelda, you might as well have Final Fantasy VII. Now, obviously, that's a lot of games for launch day. If that all ends up coming true, that could be the strongest launch day in Nintendo history, just based on the third-party support alone. This is why I said I don't think Nintendo really needs to have much much more than Mario Kart, Metroid, and maybe like a small party game of their own. However, there is one other thing that I do think we are going to see from Nintendo on launch day for Nintendo Switch 2, and that is a major update to Nintendo Switch Online. Now, obviously, we already have all the NSO apps on Switch. We know those are going to carry over to Switch 2. Switch 2 is backwards compatible, and they've already clarified in their investor meetings that Nintendo Switch Online will also be on Nintendo Switch 2. So I think the obvious choice is, well, maybe do like a new system that's exclusive to the NSO apps that are on Switch 2. Maybe do GameCube NSO, or maybe do an NSO app for DS with the mouse controls, or you could use the mouse controls as a stylus. Both of those would be great. However, that's not what I think this big update is going to be. Remember last year when Nintendo put out an application form for people to join a playtest for an upcoming Nintendo Switch Online feature for Nintendo Switch? And that playtest came and went and we didn't really hear anything about it. My assumption is that that playtest is actually for a Switch Online feature on Nintendo Switch 2. Now, what that feature entails, I literally have no idea. I did not enter the playtest, and if I did do the playtest, I wouldn't have been able to talk about it anyway. But I do feel like because that was put out back then, and we still haven't heard anything about it since, if we don't hear about it during the rumored February Direct that might happen to wrap up the Switch games, I do think it's something that will be showcased in the Switch 2 presentation in April. So I think that will wrap things up for what I believe in terms of games and features coming on launch day for Nintendo Switch 2. New Nintendo Switch Online feature probably has something to do with the playtest. Super strong, unprecedented third-party support at launch with games ranging from Elden Ring to Final Fantasy VII Remake, and 3 Nintendo titles: Mario Kart, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, and some type of small party game experience. Maybe it's a WarioWare, but it's something that has to do with the new control feature that's like a mouse in the Joy-Cons. Now, the only 2 questions left are how much is this thing gonna cost, and when are we going to see it released? I'm gonna put 2 predictions out there right now. I feel very strongly about both of them. First off, I wanna talk about price. The OLED currently, the regular Nintendo Switch OLED, is $350. I do not see a world in which the Nintendo Switch 2 is also $350 without a major price drop for the OLED, and I honestly don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, which is why I believe this thing is going to launch at $399 US. Not with the game, not with anything else, just by itself. Bare bones, Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be $399. With that said, much like how with the Wii U you had the standard edition and then the deluxe edition that was $50 more, I think we are going to get a deluxe package for the Nintendo Switch 2 that's $50 more with 3 months of Nintendo Switch Online and Mario Kart bundled in. And while I'm willing to budge on the idea that there might not be a Mario Kart bundle there at launch day, even though my gut is telling me there absolutely will be one with that game bundled in, I am not willing to budge at all on the base system price. It is absolutely going to be $399.99. I would be shocked if this thing was anything more, and I just don't see it going as low as $350. I think $399 is that sweet spot that they're going to want to hit, and I think they're going to deliver. So I talked about the games, I talked about the price. All that's left is to talk about the release date. When do I think we will all have the Nintendo Switch 2 in our hands? My guess is that Nintendo Switch 2 is going to launch on Friday, May 23rd, for a number of reasons. First off, that weekend is Memorial Day weekend. Nintendo obviously would love to take the opportunity to take over the news cycle for a 3-day weekend. Everyone's going to be off work, everyone's going to be home from school, families can get together and play Mario Kart over the long weekend. It just seems absolutely perfect. It's right before summer break as well. Some kids might actually already be out for summer break by that point. So I just think it's the perfect time to sort of highlight the beginning of summer and start off the next generation of Nintendo. But also, there's a couple other reasons that I have for this date. The Nintendo Switch 1 presentation happened, and then the Switch 1 released about 7 weeks later. The Nintendo Switch 2 presentation is happening on April 2nd, and Memorial Day weekend this year is about 7 weeks later. 3, the other reason why I think it's going to be this date. If we are lining everything up exactly, Throughout the course of April, we have those Nintendo Switch 2 experience events. There's one in New York, there's one in Los Angeles, there's one in Dallas, and I think there's also international ones as well. I think there's one in Korea, there's one in London. I know there's definitely one in Tokyo. I think those are going throughout April and May. However, mid-May, or I think the second week of May, is PAX East. Now, PAX is where Nintendo previously had Nintendo Live. I think this would be a great final opportunity, final marketing push for the Nintendo Switch 2 in North America. This is after all three of the North American experiences have happened, and that weekend of Memorial Day weekend is also before Summer Game Fest, so people could have the system in their hands. It'll then have been like 3 months since we got a lot of information and a lot of game announcements, and then Nintendo can come out the gate swinging in early June and have a giant summer Nintendo Direct focused on all the games coming for Switch 2. Updates on the ones that were teased during the Switch presentation, like the 3D Mario game for the holiday season, the new Splatoon, the new Monolith game, whatever, plus announcements for tons of other games leading throughout the course of the next year for Nintendo Switch 2. I just think that timeline, having it be a 3-day weekend, Memorial Day weekend, where everyone's off school, everyone's off work, having that day also land around the same time frame as the Switch 1 presentation was to the Switch 1's release date, and having it smack dab between PAX East and Summer Game Fest, the timing is just right. Memorial Day weekend, write it on your calendars now. That is when I think we are getting Nintendo Switch 2. And also, one other quick thing that I'm thinking of that I just remembered, Nintendo World opens at Universal Orlando on the 22nd of May, meaning Nintendo World would open presumably the day before the launch for Nintendo Switch 2. They could potentially have a giant Nintendo Switch 2 launch party for the opening of the Nintendo theme park in Orlando. I just think the stars are aligning, folks. Memorial Day weekend, I really do think that's when we're getting Switch 2. But now it's time for all of you to share with me what you think the Nintendo Switch 2 launch day is going to look like. Am I completely off the mark in terms of the release date, in terms of launch games, in terms of the pricing? Yell at me, argue with me down in the comments below. If you liked anything that I had to say in this prediction video, leave a like on this video. And of course, if you want more Nintendo content, please make sure to subscribe. I do reactions, news videos, all kinds of stuff, playthroughs, and I am very, very, very much looking forward to covering everything and anything Nintendo Switch 2, both in the lead up to Switch 2 and of course after Switch 2 gets released. So like, comment, subscribe, and until next time, I'll talk to you guys later. Nakama!